The holidays are all about sharing with family. Meals, couches, stories, Grandma's secret pecan pie recipe. And now, you can also share a cart with Instacart's family carts. Everyone can add what they want to one group cart from wherever they are. So you don't have to go from room to find out who wants cranberry sauce, or who should get mini marshmallows for the yams, or collecting votes for sugar cookies versus shortbread. Just share a cart and then share the meals and the moments. Download the Instacart app and get delivery in as fast as 30 minutes. Plus, enjoy free delivery on your first 3 orders. Service fees and terms apply.
Why get all your holiday decorations delivered through Instacart? Because maybe you only bought 2 wreaths, but you have 12 windows. Or maybe your toddler got very eager with the advent calendar. Or maybe the inflatable snowman didn't make it through the snowstorm. Or maybe the twinkle lights aren't twinkling. Whatever the reason, this season, Instacart's here for hosts and their whole holiday haul. Get decorations from the Home Depot, CVS, and more through Instacart and enjoy free delivery on your first 3 orders. Service fees and terms apply.
We're totally booked.
Rock and roll!
Well, I think I'll leave you to your reading.
Little Hand says it's time to rock and roll.
Rock and roller!
We are totally booked.
Welcome to Booked on Rock, the podcast for those about to read and rock. Find us online at bookedonrock.com. Every episode in audio and video, exclusive video segments from episodes, a blog, the latest rock book releases, and make sure you check out the all-new Booked on Rock store. Hat, t-shirts, tote bags, sweaters, hoodies, and more at bookedonrock.com. Returning to the podcast is Greg Prato. He's just released his latest book titled Lead Clones, the Led Zeppelin Imitator Craze of the 80s and beyond. Few bands in rock history have proven to be as enduring and influential as Led Zeppelin. During the 80s, there was an overabundance of Zeppelin disciples, or as guitar great Gary Moore once put it, lead clones. This is the first ever book to tell the story about Zeppelin's immense influence on the bands and artists who came after them. I asked Greg about many of the bands and the artists in the book, the ones who do Zepp justice, the ones who didn't. There are obvious ones like Kingdom Come, Whitesnake, and Greta Van Fleet, while there are others you may be surprised make the book. Let's find out right now. A Lead Clones playlist can be found in this episode's show notes. Greg, welcome back.
Hello, Eric. Good to see you again.
All right, so let's get this out of the way. We're going to talk about your new book, Lead Clones, but let's talk about your Jets. What the hell is going on with your Jets?
Jesus. Thankfully, the Mets provided a little bit of pleasure for me this year.
I mean, it's a dumpster fire, as they call it.
It is.
It's a dumpster fire.
I mean, honestly, I hate to be a complete pessimist, but you could kind of see it coming a little bit. Just, I hate to kick people when they're down, but the general manager was clueless. The head coach was clueless. Just, things that were very obvious, like, for instance, last year, do they have any kind of backup quarterback and plan in case anything happened to Rodgers? Of course, they didn't. This year, their kicker is struggling. Do you try a new kicker? No, you just keep bringing him out there so he blows 3 games. The season's pretty much done. So
yeah,
that's a microcosm of the Jets, and I'm upset that I should have put this book out this year.
There it is.
I would have had so many more things to add to this.
So for those who are just listening to the audio episode, Greg has 2 New York Jets books that you can thoroughly enjoy. What are the titles?
Okay, the first one I put out a few years back called Sack Exchange, The Definitive Oral History of the 1980s New York Jets. Now, that book I highly recommend to any Jets fan now because that actually focuses on an era where the Jets were surprisingly very good.
Ken O'Brien, Gastineau.
Exactly. Klecko, Gastineau, Freeman McNeil, Wesley Walker, all those great players. So that book is the perfect antidote to what's going on right now with the Jets. And
which
then
you could add to this other book you're about to mention, The Follies.
And if you're a complete masochist, you'd want to follow it up with this book, which is called Butt Fumbles, Fake Spikes, Mud Balls, and Heidi Games, the top 100 debacles of the New York Jets. And this is you're going to like this. This is the updated, expanded Torn Achilles edition.
Yeah, that's right, because that was when last year, Aaron Rodgers.
What happened was I put this book out before last year, and I was watching that first game with my friends and we saw Rodgers get injured, and we're all speechless looking at each other. And then I immediately said, you know what? This book has to be expanded.
Yes.
There you,
you can add another chapter in this season.
you could.
All right, on to
Absolutely.
much better news. Your brand
Yes,
new book.
please.
Let's
Jesus, very. That's a very, very depressing beginning. I got to tell
depressing.
you.
My apologies. Yeah, let's get to Lead Clones, the Led Zeppelin Imitator Craze of the 80s and beyond. We'll start off by getting into where the title comes from. Let's
Yes.
talk about that. Where does that come from? Lead Clones.
Good. Okay. Yeah. Gary Moore had a song from the late '80s called "Lead Clones" with Ozzy Osbourne singing on it, and that was from his After the War album. And I remember getting it when I was younger, and I kind of knew what he was talking about. He was poking fun at some because it's funny when we think of the '80s now, we think primarily of hair metal or glam metal, and also I would say thrash metal. Those are the main metal styles. But one genre that has been totally forgotten almost was the whole entire Lead Clones a movement, which was bands like Whitesnake, Kingdom Come, that pretty much were just shameless ripoffs of '70s era Led Zeppelin. So what Gary Moore was doing was he was poking fun of them at the time, which was a pretty ballsy move on his part because that was when those bands were still around. So, he could have just not said anything about it, but he opted to say something about it while it was going on. So I remember it was a few months back. It's funny, these ideas for these books just come to me. I was driving in my car and I don't know what happened or something just set off in my mind. I was like, wait a second. I don't think there's ever been a book about all the '80s Led Zeppelin clone bands. So I decided I should probably do it. And what better title than Lead Clones? So I'd like to give a tip of the cap to the late, great Gary Moore for coming up with that book title.
An interesting thought that crossed my mind while I'm reading this book. Some of these bands that make the book, I feel they got it right. I'm a fan of. I don't see it as a negative. It's like, okay, this is a genuine thing inspired by Zeppelin. While there are other bands, it's more like it's planned out, like, let's sound like Zeppelin so we can be famous. Like that happened more so in the 80s because Zeppelin was really huge. FM radio was playing Zeppelin so much during that period. So I think it was an intentional thing. But a band like Great White, to me, they did it right. While Kingdom Come didn't sound genuine to me. Does that make sense? Do you feel that way?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I was never a big Great White fan, but I can see what you're saying. I mean, personally, what I would say is I think the band Badlands was really good. That's a band that a lot of people forget about. That was Jake E. Lee's first band after he left Ozzy.
Jake E. Lee.
That had a singer named Ray Gillen who passed away in the '90s, who was a very underrated singer, fantastic singer. And also Eric Singer was in that band before he joined Kiss. From that band, I think he left to join Kiss. I could be wrong, though. I may be off by a year, but
Alice Cooper, right? Wasn't he with Alice Cooper, too?
He may have gone from Badlands to Alice Cooper to Kiss, maybe. Maybe that's the chain of events. I forget exactly. But their first album, to me, is one of the 80s most underrated rock albums. That's an album that not too many people know about, but it's great. And they have some songs that sound like Zeppelin, but they're not a shameless Zeppelin ripoff. I highly recommend people check out that album. And then, of course, Billy Squier, Don't Say No. I thought it was a fantastic album. I mean, there are definitely some Zeppelin-type sounds, but it's not like that Billy Squier was trying to replicate Robert Plant vocally each song. I mean, he maybe had a little bit of Robert Plant in his vocals, but it wasn't shameless like what David Coverdale is doing in the middle breakdown of the song Still of the Night, or what the Kingdom Come guys were doing on the song Get It On. So there were definitely bands in the 80s. And I also point out in the book, one album that people tend to overlook also is the Kiss Creatures of the Night album, because while Kiss never really sounded too much like Led Zeppelin, Eric Carr's drum sound on that album is very John Bonham-esque. I always loved his whole entire drum sound on that. In fact, probably the two best drum sounds of the early 80s, I would say, is Eric Carr on Kiss Creatures of the Night and the late Bobby Chouinard on Billy Squier's Don't Say No. Both of them got great, huge Bonham drum sounds on those two albums.
Yeah, he doesn't get mentioned a lot.
Not at all.
For
he
that.
Definitely should, because he was an underrated great drummer.
Well, Led Zeppelin disbanded in 1980, as most know, after John Bonham died. But there were already bands influenced by Zeppelin before then, before we get to the 80s. Talk about some of the bands from the 70s that were influenced by Zeppelin, or were they? And I mentioned that because there's a part about Rush in the book where that debut single, Working Man, was mistaken for Zeppelin when it first got played on WMMS in Cleveland, but guitarist Alex Lifeson told you that the song was definitely not inspired by Zeppelin.
Yes, true. Yeah, he said it was surprisingly inspired by Cream, if you could believe that. But I personally think that it's definitely much more Zeppelin sounding. Yeah, Rush is one of my all-time favorite bands. I have to say, Rush and Van Halen kind of go neck and neck for me. How about you, Eric?
I've heard of Van Halen. I have heard of them. We're going to talk about them because they do make the book.
Yes, they do. But well, yeah, but to answer your question, yeah, I mean, Rush has to be included. They even admit that they started off very Zeppelin-esque, especially on that first album, the 1974 self-titled album. Had a lot of Led Zeppelin moments, such as "Finding My Way" and the riffing and the song "Working Man." So yeah, but to Rush's credit, they then with each album moved further and further away until they found their own very unique style and also approach. So you got to give them credit. Other bands, Triumph is kind of early on, had some Zeppelin sounding moments. One thing, Heart, people say, some people consider them a Canadian band because some of their members were based in British Columbia, whereas some of them were also based in Seattle, Washington. So I kind of consider them a Canadian band, but I see how some people wouldn't. But definitely there are some parts of Heart that sound like Zeppelin, such as the song Barracuda. That's a very obvious example. But then there's one totally forgotten band, Canadian band called Moxie, that no one really seems to remember.
Moxie.
Yeah, I discovered them because in the early 90s, I bought the Tommy Bolin box set called The Ultimate, and I became a really big fan of Tommy Bolin. And he did some session work for them on their first album. I believe it's a self-titled album from 1975 or 76. I'm pretty sure it's 75. And they have one or two songs that sound identical to Led Zeppelin. I would highly recommend, if anyone wants to be blown away by a band sounding almost identical to Led Zeppelin, check out that first Moxie album. It's a black cover, and it just says Moxie on the cover.
If they're on Spotify, I can put it on the playlist for this episode.
Do it. Go for it.
MOXY?
MOXY, correct.
MOXY. Yeah, you mentioned Heart. Vancouver, I think some of the members were
Some of the members, yeah. And then Ann and Nancy Wilson, I believe, are from Seattle, right?
Yeah, because I think Ann, didn't she went to Canada because her boyfriend lived there.
Yes, who was then, I believe, Heart's manager at the time, I believe.
Right.
I could be wrong, though.
Right. But yeah, Nancy Wilson told you Zeppelin was a huge influence, but you can hear other influences, which makes sense why she told you that there are other artists and bands they were trying to emulate. She said, quote, "When we first saw the Beatles, we wanted to be in the band. Then we saw Zeppelin. We wanted to be Zeppelin. I was channeling Jimmy Page and Elton John's piano playing on acoustic guitar. Interesting. And was channeling Robert Plant and Paul Rogers." That's what she told you.
Yeah, very true.
Barracuda, you mentioned. You say a passing resemblance to Achilles' Last Stand, which is an interesting observation. But Nancy told you there was another band who influenced this riff.
Yes.
Remember what she told you about this?
I believe it was the band called Nazareth, right? If I remember correctly. Yep. Yeah, they have a obscure song. I can't remember the name of it. You may have the song title right there in front of you.
Yeah, This Flight Tonight.
Okay. Yeah,
and it's actually a cover of a Joni Mitchell song.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and I actually went on Spotify after I read that and listened to it, and you can hear a little bit of a similarity. So yeah, if you want to add that to the playlist, that would be good for some of the listeners to check that out as well.
And she pissed the guys in Nazareth off, right?
Right. Yeah,
he took our riff.
She actually says, I believe they toured. It was Queen, Heart, Nazareth. I can't think of. I mean, that's a very strong bill right there.
Booked on Rock Podcast. We'll be back after this.
I gotta go now, but don't you leave town, huh?
The holidays are all about sharing with family. Meals, couches, stories, Grandma's secret pecan pie recipe. And now you can also share a cart with Instacart's family carts. Everyone can add what they want to one group cart from wherever they are. So you don't have to go from room to room to find out who wants cranberry sauce, or who should get mini marshmallows for the yams, or collecting votes for sugar cookies versus shortbread. Just share a cart and then share the meals and the moments. Download the Instacart app and get delivery in as fast as 30 minutes. Plus enjoy free delivery on your first 3 orders. Service fees and terms apply.
Why get all your holiday decorations delivered through Instacart? Because maybe you only bought 2 wreaths, but you have 12 windows. Or maybe your toddler got very eager with the advent calendar. Or maybe the inflatable snowman didn't make it through the snowstorm. Or maybe the twinkle lights aren't twinkling. Whatever the reason, this season Instacart's here for hosts and their whole holiday haul. Get decorations from the Home Depot, CVS, and more through Instacart and enjoy free delivery on your first 3 orders. Service fees and terms apply.
Speaking of Rush, a band who formed in the 70s, similar to Rush, is Triumph. Like you mentioned, there is that Zeppelin influence, but I always compared them to Rush because it's a trio.
Yes, I agree. I do agree. One thing that, I was going to mention too, for this book, I did several exclusive interviews for this book, as well as going back and pulling some quotes from interviews that I conducted with a lot of people over the years, and also some other magazines and also sites and things like that. But you get the trademark Greg Prato analyzation throughout the whole bloody thing.
Nice.
But one thing that when I interviewed Rick Emmett for this book, he said, which I didn't know this at all, that Triumph early on, before they had an album out, they would actually do Led Zeppelin sets in bars that would actually pay them very well. In fact, that's what the bar owners wanted them to do. And at some point, I think they had to say, no, we're not doing that anymore. We have to do original stuff. And to their credit, that's when their career took off. But yeah, they said that early on, they would actually do all Led Zeppelin sets, and they were very popular, those sets.
One of the questions I have here, I want to go back to Creatures of the Night. Eric Carr, talk about that massive sound on that album.
Yes.
This is a fascinating part of your book on how they managed to capture the sound on tape.
Yes.
What do you remember about that?
Yeah, I believe I interviewed Michael James Jackson for an earlier book called The Eric Carr Story, and I was able to use that quote in this book. He talks about they put microphones down a elevator shaft, I believe, and they played the drums and recorded it that way to get a echoey, huge, booming sound, which I've never heard anyone ever trying that before or since. So that's and it absolutely paid off. And something that I really think Kiss fumbled the ball with is they didn't continue in that path. They really should have continued with that Creatures of the Night huge sound, but instead what they did with starting with Lick It Up and with each 80s album as it went on, they got further and further away from that sound and just pretty much embraced the puny 80s, very trebly sound, which I really don't like at all with a lot of... In fact, recently I've been listening to a lot of the 80s bands, and it's weird. Some bands sound better than others. Van Halen Diver Down sounds absolutely fantastic. Excuse me, sounds absolutely fantastic. But, then you listen to, I don't know, I'm sure if you listen to like Motley Crue, Girls, it's probably not very bassy. I'm just trying to remember what it sounded like. That's just my personal opinion.
I was just listening to the Shouted Out Loudcast guys on Eddie Trunk because they're promoting a book, which you're in. I believe you're in their book. Tom and Zeus. Yeah, Raise Your Glasses. It covers every every Kiss song. Every Kiss song,
yes.
Every Kiss album. And Eddie Trunk asked the guys if they had to choose between Creatures of the Night or Lick It Up. Tom was saying by a mile he picks Lick It Up over Creatures of the Night, which is surprising.
I totally disagree.
I think Zeus disagreed.
I 100% disagree with that. Creatures of the Night I would put in my top 5 Kiss studio albums of all time, and I'm pretty much just a 70s Kiss guy. Like that's really all I really listen to be honest with you. So for me to put that above, say, like possibly Dynasty or Love Gun, definitely I think is a pretty glowing endorsement for that album.
Yeah, Tom said he had like number 17 on his list of Kiss albums, and Zeus I think had, just like you, top 5, which I would say is top 5 too.
Well, that's the thing that's so good about music is each person, like I could say an album or a band, you're going to say, no, I can't stand that band. Whereas I think it's fantastic. That's what's so good about music. And that's sadly something that's getting lost with social media and Twitter, just people just acting like total assholes. If you ever say anything like, oh, I like this band or that band, it's like, no, what are you talking about? Blah, blah, blah. No one can just... That
blows my mind.
I know. No one can just expect other people having different opinions or different musical tastes or just tastes with anything,
Some people take it personally.
Personal to the point that they would want to almost like they'd want to physically attack you if they had the opportunity.
Yeah, it's like, dude, calm down, man.
You know what?
We're just...
I have to ask you a question now.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the Alex Van Halen book?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. In fact, that's one of my
All
questions
right,
here.
so then we could just get to it later if you want.
Yeah, no, we're right about there,
Okay.
because I was going to get into the 80s, and the bands in the 80s that sounded like Zeppelin. So let's talk about that, because Alex always was chasing the bottom sound, and
Yes.
he really achieves it on For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge.
See, now I'm glad you brought that up. I was gonna make a point, and I'll see if you agree with me. I think Van Halen was much more Led Zeppelin sounding with Sammy Hagar in the band than when they had David Lee Roth in the band.
Well, they had a different groove. They definitely had a different groove, and I think with Dave, I hear what you're saying, especially on For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge and the follow-up album Balance.
Yes. And would you also
where it's a
agree,
massive bottom-like sound.
Would you also agree that Van Halen sounded more like Right Said Fred when they had Gary Sharon in the band?
Right Said Fred. I love it. I Gary's such a good sport about
He is.
it.
I got to tell you, I interviewed him a few years back, and he couldn't have been a nicer, sweeter guy. So I'm just poking a little bit of fun, but no, I do have a lot of respect for him.
Yeah, props to him,
Yes.
man, because he answers the questions about Van Halen 3.
Absolutely.
He is not shy. He had some good talks with Eddie just before Eddie passed away.
Yeah,
they had some good conversations.
And also, to his credit, I interviewed, I believe it was Eddie Trunk once, and he said he heard some of the demos for songs that were going to be on the next Gary Sharon album, and he said they were so much better than the songs that were on Van Halen 3. So I guess we'll never know. But that's actually a compliment, though.
Yeah, it just never happened. Yeah. But Alex's book, my thoughts on the book. Yeah, I wish that he covered the Sammy years. Yeah. It's still interesting to me that he said his reasoning behind that is the Dave years were the more spectacular years, the special years. Not that there was anything bad about what they did after that, but he won't even mention Sammy's name.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's more of a slight to Sammy,
I think it is,
or if he's just,
I think it is. If this book was written back in 1988, he would have said nothing about David Lee Roth, and the whole book would have been about Sammy Hagar.
Right? I mean, 4 number 1 albums, and 5150 is one of the greatest comeback albums in rock history. You got Dave leaving the band, maybe the most famous frontman at that time in rock and roll. Huge shoes to fill, everybody expecting it to fail, and they come out with 5150, which goes to number 1, a number 2 single with Why Can't This Be Love, a huge victory for them. And then they follow up, as we know, OU2, and they're headlining the Monsters of Rock Festival. They go into the 90s when a lot of these bands from the 80s are starting to fall off the charts, and they have Right Now, and they have Top of the World and Pound Cake. And I mean, it's not as if there's nothing to write about.
Right. I have to be honest, though.
And he should have looked at it this way. From the aspect of what Eddie was doing, he was having fun spreading out and writing different type of music. He was actually sounding more Clapton-like, like on When It's Love. I remember he said that solo was like Clapton. So his brother was having fun writing those songs.
Yeah. Although I have to be honest, I was never a Van Hagar fan. I'd really just listened to strictly the David Lee Roth, and I love like we talked about in the past. I love the David Lee Roth "Eat 'Em and Smile" album as well. I think that
"Eat 'Em Smile" is great.
I have to be honest. To this day, I don't think I've ever heard 5150 from beginning to end. What do you think of that?
You've never? Wow!
I don't think I've ever heard any Van Hagar album other than for Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, because I remember I bought that album when it came out because I read an interview. I remember this. It was an interview with Eddie Van Halen in Guitar for the Practicing Musician. Remember that magazine?
Yeah.
Okay. And he said it was his best playing ever. So I was like, oh, then I have to go hear this. And I bought it. Didn't like it at all.
So yeah, you're just not a big. I'm just
not. And
Van Hagar.
I like the first. I love the first Montrose album. I just was never into Sammy Hagar solo. Not into Van Halen with Sammy Hagar. I just like Van Halen with David Lee Roth. It's the only Van Halen I listen to.
Getting back to the theme of the book, Zeppelin, I know Van Halen in their club days played some Zeppelin songs. They covered some Zeppelin songs.
Yeah, they did. Yeah. We talk a little bit about that. I don't know offhand which Zeppelin songs they are. I think they probably did. I think they were more fan.
Trampled Underfoot, I think.
Was more a fan of actually Black Sabbath than Zeppelin. I think it was Alex that was more the Zeppelin fan.
Yeah, and he says in the book that he really wanted their music to sound more like Zeppelin-like. He wasn't the guy who wanted to do the harmonies. It was Ted Templeman. but that actually set them apart from everyone else.
Right.
That sweetened up the sound. And as you know, it became a huge part of that formula that worked for Van Halen. But yeah, the Dave years are untouchable. Yeah. But yeah, they did Trampled Underfoot.
Okay.
Trying to think of what else. Yeah, I can't recall. We could look it up, the club days, but obviously they were Zeppelin fans, and you could see a little bit of the Robert Plant influence on Dave. They always talk about the what's his name that they say
Golden God.
Jim Dandy.
All right, yeah. And also his whole, like, Robert Plant had the whole Golden God shtick. You could say
right
that David Lee Roth kind of copied that. Also, now, I mean, there are definitely parts of Van Halen with the David Lee Roth era that do sound a little bit like Zeppelin, like the song "Sunday Afternoon in the Park." The drums, I always thought sound a lot like Bonham.
You mentioned that in the book.
Mentioned that in the book, and
in a simple rhyme, you say
that song
too.
always reminded me of like a Zeppelin type sounding song for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe the 12 string. I don't know, but that song always kind of
in a simple rhyme from Women and Children First, which is a great album.
Great album.
But other bands, Whitesnake, of course, in the 80s, they became huge late in the decade. You mentioned Billy Squier.
Yes.
And you cited his album 1981's Don't Say No. So you did cover that. How about Def Leppard?
Yes.
There's some Zeppelin influence there, but I would say the early Def Leppard stuff, more of an AC/DC sound, those early songs.
Yeah, it's actually a good point. I mean, honestly, I never really heard that much Zeppelin with Def Leppard, other than the spelling of their names are very, very similar. And I know that Def Leppard's original guitarist, the late Steve Clark, was a huge Zeppelin fan. So, and he even had like the low slung Les Paul, similar to Jimmy Page, and will also play a double neck 12 string live. So, I mean, that's probably the biggest Zeppelin connections for me. I mean, there can't really think of, like, for instance,
the Queen influence you mentioned with Def Leppard.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I think Def Leppard, there's much more of a Queen influence on Def Leppard than there is a Zeppelin influence.
Booked on Rock Podcast. We'll be back after this.
Now you wait here. I'll be right back.
Why get all your holiday decorations delivered through Instacart? Because maybe you only bought 2 wreaths, but you have 12 windows. Or maybe your toddler got very eager with the advent calendar. Or maybe the inflatable snowman didn't make it through the snowstorm. Or maybe the twinkle lights aren't twinkling. Whatever the reason, this season, Instacart's here for hosts and their whole holiday haul. Get decorations from the Home Depot, CVS, and more through Instacart and enjoy free delivery on your first 3 orders. Service fees and terms apply.
The holidays are all about sharing with family. Meals, couches, stories, Grandma's secret pecan pie recipe. And now you can also share a cart with Instacart's family carts. Everyone can add what they want to one group cart from wherever they are. So you don't have to go from room to find out who wants cranberry sauce, or who should get mini marshmallows for the yams, or collecting votes for sugar cookies versus shortbread. Just share a cart and then share the meals and the moments. Download the Instacart app and get delivery in as fast as 30 minutes. Plus, enjoy free delivery on your first 3 orders. Service fees and terms apply.
Greg Prato, our guest, just released his latest book titled Lead Clones, the Led Zeppelin Imitator Craze of the 80s and Beyond. So we're going beyond the 80s. There it is. Who did the cover art? Was it your wife did that as well?
And it's my wife, Mary Prato. She's very, very talented when it comes to designing covers. She has an art background. She's an art teacher.
Cool.
So she's always kind enough to help me out with the books. We collaborate on the ideas, and she can always take my ideas and make them reality. So
yeah, that's cool.
I tip my cap to Mary Prato.
Nice. Steering away from Zeppelin a bit here, there's quite a story from your book on Billy Squier when he's recording in the dark the night John Lennon was assassinated, and Billy only lived 4 blocks from the Dakota where Lennon was shot. Billy's bassist, Mark Clark, you told.
Yes.
You talked to him. He told the story.
Yes. I interviewed Mark Clark. Yeah. Some of the other people I interviewed specifically for this book were Great White's former manager, Alan Niven, who was Great White's manager, and he was also the manager of Guns N' Roses early on, which is pretty much the only Guns N' Roses era I really ever listened to or like, which is the Appetite for Destruction era. I interviewed him as well. He had some very interesting things to say. And yeah, several other people. There's several pretty decent, lengthy original interviews I did just strictly for this book. But yeah, Mark Clark was the bassist who played on the Billy Squier Don't Say No album. And he talks about how they were working on a classic Billy Squier track, subsequent classic track. And they go out into the waiting room, I think, of the recording studio, and the TV is on. And that's when they found out the sad news that John Lennon was shot and sadly later killed.
Yeah. In the dark, they were recording
In the dark,
that
yeah.
track.
Yep.
That track. So you get stories like that in the book too. You
Yes.
mentioned Zebra. I'm so glad you mentioned Zebra. I actually have a friend of my brother's loves Zebra. He goes out and sees them play over in New York at Daryl Hall's place there. Daryl's Place is the name of the club.
Right.
And Zebra plays there all the time. All the
Okay.
time. Yeah. Tell us about Zebra for those who may not be familiar with Zebra.
Yeah, they're a band that started out, I believe, in New Orleans, then relocated to Long Island, and they were part of the same bar scene that actually Twisted Sister came out of. That there were these bands that were super huge on Long Island that could play to thousands of people, but they could just not get recording contracts in the early 80s for some reason. So eventually, though, they were both Twisted Sister and Zebra were able to break through and get recording contracts. And Twisted Sister is, I think, obviously much more better known than Zebra. But Zebra for about a year or so were actually pretty popular.
Yeah.
I know they had that first album that they claim was the best-selling Atlantic Records debut of all time, which I personally think is bullshit because there's no way that outsold the first Led Zeppelin album.
Yeah.
I mean, you can tell me all these different theories or numbers, but I think it's just hogwash personally. But
Yeah,
whatever.
I never heard that. Yeah, Who's Behind the Door and
Yep.
Tell Me What You Want.
The song I really know by them is the song "Tell Me What You Want." That was the one that was played a lot on MTV, and their videos, if you go back and watch their videos now, are completely unwatchable. But that song in particular, if you don't watch the video, just listen to the song, and you won't be distracted, and you'll be able to detect the Zeppelin-esque influence there.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, 1983, first album, went gold, number 29 on Billboard. Yeah, so they're saying that was the biggest selling debut album on Atlantic
They were saying
Records.
it was the
Fastest selling
debut album.
Okay.
Yeah, which yeah.
Maybe.
I mean, then what we can start saying? What was the best selling Atlantic Records album that had a black cover?
Right.
Yeah. What was the best selling album of Thursday?
Right.
I mean,
exactly. Yeah. Of all the bands compared to Zeppelin from the 80s, I would say Kingdom Come and Whitesnake are probably the two biggies. And I'll take Whitesnake.
There was a third one, though.
All right.
Bonham.
Yeah, Bonham. You know, it's funny. I almost feel like because it's Jason's Bonham's band and he's the son of John, it's like it doesn't count. But you're right. They had a great song.
Wait for You.
Wait for You. Wait for You. Great song.
If you go back and listen to that song now, it is preposterous how much they just totally shamelessly
the lead singer,
Led Zeppelin. And it was funny because that kind of put Jimmy Page and also especially Robert Plant in a very tight spot because both of them were completely making fun of and ridiculing all of the Led clones up till then. And then the band Bonham comes out, and because it has Jason Bonham and it sounds like the most shameless Led Zeppelin ripoff, they both kind of had to like bite their tongues a little bit and not say like what the fuck. But meanwhile, if you listen to it, it's worse, not worse, but it's much more shameless than Great White, Whitesnake, or Kingdom Come. I would say Bonham takes the cake.
And they pulled up his drums in the mix. You could tell way up in the mix. You know, he was the star of the band. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But
Absolutely,
I'll take Whitesnake any day over Kingdom Come. I know, regardless of those who accuse.
Well, honestly, I always, one thing I got to be honest, I'm not a big Whitesnake fan. I mean, it's a very popular thing people say is that, I don't like the 1987 Whitesnake album, but their earlier things I love.
Right.
Like I love Come and Get It and Saints and Sinners.
Those are the early ones. They're more like straight out of his Deep Purple days.
Yeah, I tried listening to him and I couldn't get into it. But that said, I love David Coverdale's work with Deep Purple. So at least I can say that there is an era of David Coverdale that I am a very big fan of. But Whitesnake just really doesn't do it for me.
Did you like Slip of the Tongue with Stevie Vai?
Oh, yeah. The thing is, back in the 80s, I listened to a lot of music that now I just can't stand. It's probably the same with a lot of people. Just you either outgrow stuff or Whitesnake, when I listen to it now, I just really don't like it at all. But at the time, I loved it. I bought the 87 album. I bought Slip of the Tongue because I was a huge Steve Vai fan. But listening to it now, oh, I can't even make it past a few seconds. To
Yeah.
be honest.
Well, Still of the Night has that breakdown that sounds like a whole
No.
lot of love, but also Judgment
Yes.
Day off of Slip of the Tongue sounds like Kashmir.
I got to tell you, doing research for this book, like I had not listened to the whole song "Still of the Night" in years, maybe even decades, and I listened to it, and it was an absolute fascinating piece of work. Not for all the right reasons, for all the complete wrong reasons. I mean, I could not believe what I was hearing, number one. I then went back and watched the video, and there's the part where Adrian Vandenberg has a violin bow like Jimmy Page.
Yes.
But it's not. He's not even really. I can understand if he was playing the violin bow, but it's not even. He's just replicating what a orchestra is playing.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just
What was Robert Plant's nickname for him? David Cover
version.
Cover version. And then
I got to say, I was able to go back and dig up some forgotten quotes. You got to give Robert Plant credit. He was very witty and very funny. I remember it's funny at the time. I was like, oh, that's kind of like, fucked up. He's making fun of Whitesnake because I was like a fan of Whitesnake at the time. But now that I'm older and I can, I've distanced myself and I can see, some of the things he said are very, very funny and also very, very witty. Like one thing he was saying, which is a good point. He's like, when I started out, I admit I was kind of aping, I was aping Elvis Presley. But the thing is, Elvis Presley was like miles and miles away from me. And like, he, I didn't know him. But he says, but then here's David Coverdale trying to sound like me. And here's a guy that's like my age and someone like I hung out with. Like, what the hell is that about? Which, that is a very valid point.
You talk about awkward for Robert had to have been awkward when his bandmate Jimmy Page forms a band with David Coverdale.
Right. Well, see that's
when I think those quotes came from Robert. A lot of those quotes, I think, is when but that's a great, I like that album, Coverdale Page.
See now, I'm glad you said that because now that's an album that I never had any interest in listening to because when that came out in 1993, that was the last thing I wanted to hear because I was all about Smashing Pumpkins, Faith No More, Soundgarden. I did not want to hear anything to do with David Coverdale. And also something I talk about in the book, I don't know where are you based again, Eric? I forget.
Connecticut, Southington, Connecticut. So not too far from where you are, about 45 minutes from Toad's Place, a place you've gone many times in New Haven. Yep.
Yes. Here on Long Island, there's a radio station called WBAB.
I've heard of
and
them.
And they're pretty much a classic rock station, but they have not changed their playlist, I swear to God, since 1982.
Oh, it's sad.
You will still hear Pat Benatar. You'll still hear
Heartbreaker, Pat Benatar.
Yeah. But they will now add in like Guns N' Roses and maybe a Nirvana song here and there. But my point is that they, beginning from the early 80s, would bombard you with Led Zeppelin. And it's always the same songs over and over and over again to the point that it actually makes you sick of Led Zeppelin. So that there was a point in the late 80s, early 90s that although Led Zeppelin in the 80s, mid 80s was one of my favorite bands, but I got so burnt out on them because I was being forced to hear them nonstop. I mean, just hearing the same songs over and over that I just had to cut them off for a while. Like there were several years I just could not listen to them, which then eventually with the advent of the internet, then I didn't really have to deal with radio anymore. I could just listen to what I wanted. And then that's when I went back and listened to Led Zeppelin. And then, of course, they became one of my favorite bands again.
Yeah, I used to have a Zeppelin special on the radio station I was a DJ at in Fairfield County, Connecticut, right near New York. And it was 3 Zeppelin songs every night.
Yes.
And it would be 2 of them that had to play, which they picked, which the ones that you would hear all the time. But at least the third one, I'd always pick something really obscure because like you, I was just burned out on.
Yeah.
So I would play like, I don't know. I'd play something from like In the Evening from Into the Outdoor or something.
Right. Something that's not played that. Yeah. So like I was saying, when that album Coverdale Page came out, I had no interest in listening to it. But when I was doing research for this book, I finally sat down and I gave it a listen. And shockingly, I did not hate it.
Okay.
I listened to it. Yeah. And there were actually some songs. There's one song I talk about. I don't know the name of it. It's this 3rd or 4th song that I actually legitimately thought was a pretty good song. Like if it came on, I'd be like, yeah, it's actually, because what it was, that was one of the few songs that I thought they weren't shamelessly doing like a Led Zeppelin ripoff. It was almost like a doomy Black Sabbath vibe, which I thought was very interesting, and it wasn't what I was expecting.
Let me see if I can guess which one you mean. Sadly, it is not on Spotify. It's covered.
You know, I was going to say, I don't think
It's still not. I just looked now because I remember looking a while back. Shake My Tree, Waiting on You, Take Me for a Little While. Pride and Joy is track 4. That was the first single.
Yes. No, I have it right here. The name of the song is Over Now.
Over Now, yes.
Okay, that's the song that I was very
over
impressed
now.
with. Yes. And it's almost like a Black Sabbathy doom sound, which I was pleasantly surprised with that. So yeah, I honestly didn't hate it. I was expecting to not like it at all. I mean, granted, there are songs on there that I actually laugh out loud how preposterous they are.
Yeah, well, Take a Look at Yourself is like a Whitesnake song.
Yes, exactly. But my whole thing, my whole view on the album is I think that possibly Jimmy Page did that album hoping that it would piss off Robert Plant so much they would want to then work together, which they ultimately wound up doing 1 year later. So
could be.
It all wound up working out in the end.
Yeah, could be. Yeah. Yeah, this song by Gary Moore called Lead Clones. We talked about it up front. That's how you came up with the title. What did Gary tell you about the song? Because you did ask him about it, right?
Well, and honestly, Gary, the quotes from Gary were not an interview that I did with him. It was I forget where the quotes were.
Because he was because he was talking about how he meant it as a lighthearted joke, but some people got pissed off at him.
Yeah, like what happened was I talk about in the book. There was an issue of Kerrang magazine that all 5 members of Kingdom Come they're each holding up paper plates and each have a word on it. And I think the message is "We're so sorry, Gary," or something like that. Which is because in the song "Lead Clones," the lyric is in the chorus, I believe, or it's not even the chorus. It's like a middle part. He says, "You've got to get it on in the still of the night," which is obviously he's poking fun at Whitesnake and also Kingdom Come with their song titles. So yeah, so Kingdom Come was hurt by that, but I don't know. Kingdom Come, I think, was gone after that second album, pretty much, right?
I think so. They were on that Monsters of Rock tour with Van Halen.
They were, yes, they were
in 1988.
They were.
But the thing about Still of the Night is that it was so successful that it only encouraged bands to do that even more so because it was a huge hit. So
that's true. You know, now that I think about it, pretty sure Kingdom Come only had 2 albums. So would you say, to quote the great Dean Wormer, they were out of there like shit through a goose?
Yeah, I love it. An Animal House reference. Oh my God. What's you're on triple double probation or triple probation?
triple double secret probation.
Yeah. There's one.
Oh, no, I think it was just double secret probation.
And then one of the clips I use when I go into a commercial break for the podcast is where he says, "Things it's time to put my foot down, and that foot is me," or something, you know.
That whole movie is just chock full of classics such as "Fat, Drunk, and Stupid" is no way to go through life.
Oh yeah. Kingdom Come. I want to look up you're saying what, 2 albums?
Yes,
tops?
I believe they may have squeaked out a third one, but I know there were really only 2 albums that were promoted and that I remember hearing about on or seeing videos of on MTV.
Yeah, let's see. Oh wow, no, wait a minute, we're way off. Studio albums, they got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13.
Yeah, but you know what it is, though? I bet it's not the original lineup. I think band members started to come and go. And I think the last few aren't even with Lenny Wolf on vocals, if I'm not mistaken.
But look at Get It On, number 69 single on the mainstream charts, number 4 on the rock chart. So they actually did fairly well.
Yeah. Oh, I was going to give a shout out to also, I interviewed Eddie Trunk for this book, and he had some very good, valid points. In fact, the reason why I just thought of him, he had some great things to say, thought-provoking things to say about Kingdom Come, because he at the time was working.
I remember that in the book. Yeah.
He was working in radio and also for, I believe, Megaforce Records. So he was part of the actual record business and radio and all that stuff at the time. So he gives some good memories of what it was like to be working at radio and with also labels at the time of Kingdom Come.
Booked on Rock Podcast. We'll be back after this.
The time has come for someone to put his foot down, and that foot is me.
Why get all your holiday decorations delivered through Instacart? Because maybe you only bought 2 wreaths, but you have 12 windows. Or maybe your toddler got very eager with the advent calendar. Or maybe the inflatable snowman didn't make it through the snowstorm. Or maybe the twinkle lights aren't twinkling. Whatever the reason, this season, Instacart's here for hosts and their whole holiday haul. Get decorations from the Home Depot, CVS, and more through Instacart and enjoy free delivery on your first 3 orders. Service fees and terms apply.
The holidays are all about sharing with family. Meals, couches, stories, Grandma's secret pecan pie recipe. And now you can also share a cart with Instacart's family carts. Everyone can add what they want to one group cart from wherever they are. So you don't have to go from room to room to find out who wants cranberry sauce, or who should get mini marshmallows for the yams, or collecting votes for sugar cookies versus shortbread. Just share a cart and then share the meals and the moments. Download the Instacart app and get delivery in as fast as 30 minutes. Plus, enjoy free delivery on your first 3 orders. Service fees and terms apply.
Talk about what the guys in Zeppelin had to say about these bands. I mean, we talked about what Plant said about Coverdale, but
Yes.
what did the other guys think of? Like, what did Page say about some of those bands? What did John Paul Jones say? Did he ever talk about it? Did they like it, not like it?
Yeah, what's funny is there's a quote in there that Page says that he's very critical of Whitesnake, and we talked about before in the video for Still of the Night, Adrian Vandenberg takes out the violin bow and he's doing the whole Jimmy Page thing. And I remember Jimmy Page says he was sitting at his house one Saturday morning and he puts on MTV and the video comes on and he sees that and he said he almost fell out of his bed, is what he said. That was his quote. Because he, I guess, was either overcome with laughter or couldn't believe what he was seeing. But he was able to put his differences aside because he eventually did a whole entire bloody album with David Coverdale.
Right.
But I know also John Paul Jones talks about one thing that a lot of the drummers got wrong at the time, or the bands that were aping Led Zeppelin, was they were doing a lot of just heavy, like his quote is, bash, bash. Whereas Led Zeppelin, and especially John Bonham, was all about space. And one thing that a lot of people say made John Bonham such a great drummer is he never played to a click track. Or, I mean, maybe he did on later Zeppelin albums, but at least on like Led Zeppelin 4 and those early classic ones, he wasn't playing to a click track. And it's all the slight little speeding up and slowing down type stuff that makes him such a great drummer and made those songs breathe and have, little spaces and took on a whole entire, aura of their own.
Yeah, he was like all of the guitarists tried to copy Eddie. You could look to Bonham where all of the drummers were trying to copy his sound, but it got to the point where there was no finesse to it. It was just they're trying so much to sound like Bonzo.
Yeah,
but Bonzo was just more than just slamming away on the skins, like you said.
There's a good quote in the book by a producer named Jack Endino who produced Nirvana's Bleach. He worked with Soundgarden on their Streaming Life EP. He worked for a lot of he produced a lot of these sub pop bands in the 80s, and he said that the Coverdale Page album is the ultimate example of a album that should have had a great 70s sounding production, like a raw production, the sound of a band in a room playing live, and instead it was that awful late 80s with the drum sound where it sounds like it's like those cannon drums and just horribly overproduced and click tracks and just all that garbage.
And that was 1993. You figured they could have.
And I remember when I was interviewing Jack Endino, he was like, yeah, they were doing that in the 80s and blah, blah, blah. I was like, no, wait, they weren't doing that in the 80s. That was from 1993.
Yeah.
So there's no excuse for that because that's a few years after you have Pearl Jam and Blind Melon and Soundgarden and these bands that are doing real live sound. So there was no excuse for that at that point. I just don't get that at all.
By the way, our band Blind Melon did a great cover of Out on the Tiles.
Yes.
Right.
Although I have to say, one of my favorite Zeppelin covers, I thought Stone Temple Pilots did a fantastic cover of Dancing Days.
Yeah, that was released as a single, I think,
yes,
if I'm not mistaken. I just saw a headline, Scott Weiland's son has a band. He's a singer or
Possibly.
Just saw an email. He's released a new album or single or something. I got to check it out. Let's talk about Soundgarden. You mentioned them. Kim Thayil told you that their comparison to Zeppelin was actually something that proved harmful to the band.
Yeah. Right. Well, one thing I have to say, I often heard people say that Soundgarden was either a Zeppelin ripoff or heavily influenced by Zeppelin. I personally don't hear it that much. I think they're more of a Black Sabbathy Doom thing.
Sure.
I think it's probably Chris Cornell's high vocals, but I don't know. I never thought he was really like a Robert Plant clone or anything.
Yeah,
So
I never saw that either.
yeah, and I'm kind of friendly with Kim, and I've done interviews with all the Soundgarden guys, and they've all pretty much said that they respect Led Zeppelin, but they were not really, they weren't a band that they really replicated or set out to sound like. They came more from like punk rock, I
Yeah.
think,
Yeah.
and their whole thing was like what Black Flag did in the '80s, which was slowing down punk rock, so it's almost like Black Sabbath.
Yeah.
You know?
Sure, absolutely. There's like a
Yeah,
combination of Black Sabbath and punk, or even a
right.
little bit of like Black Sabbath and early Aerosmith kind of a
Right,
that's
because
that.
the thing with Soundgarden, they never really had any, like, boogie bluesy type songs, so that too was a little bit different, but to answer your question, yeah, what happened was there was an early show that Soundgarden was playing, and, someone in the audience, this is before they even put out an album. Someone in the audience didn't care for what they were doing because they were playing very slow, plodding stuff, and an audience member took a glass ashtray, back in the days when you could smoke, I guess, in bars, and threw it at the stage, and it crashed off of Matt Cameron's drum set and cracked. And they heard the guy in the audience say "fucking Led Zeppelin shit" or something like that
Mm,
as an insult. So I
wow.
guess the moral of the story is trying to sound like Led Zeppelin back
Right.
in the late '80s if you're playing in front of a punk rock crowd.
Right. What are the Zeppelin connections that you found with Nirvana?
They had a song on the Incesticide album, which is an outtakes album, called it was called Aero Zeppelin,
Yeah.
which to me it's not a shameless Led Zeppelin ripoff. It's just because it has a very pronounced riff in it. But even the riff, I wouldn't think sounds like Led Zeppelin. It's like sloppy punk rock. I mean, it's actually a pretty good song, but it doesn't really reek of Zeppelin, as it's not even near the same as Still of the Night or Get It On or any of those songs. But I know also that Kurt Cobain was a huge Zeppelin fan, and then of course Dave Grohl is a huge Bonham fan, and even Chad Channing, the drummer who played on Bleach, was also a big Bonham fan as well, because I interviewed him for one of my earlier books called Bonham.
Yep. And Dave Grohl has the tattoo, the
Does
symbol
have a tattoo,
that
yes.
Bonham used on Zeppelin 4.
And I think even early on, when Kurt Cobain and Chris Novoselic were looking for a drummer, they placed an ad and they listed Led Zeppelin as one of their influences, I think.
Yeah, and Zeppelin's influence on rock bands, it did fade as the years went by, but it didn't go away. Two bands that stand out among the 21st century, Wolf Mother and Greta Van Fleet. I
Yes.
loved what Wolf Mother was doing. I like Greta Van Fleet, but I'd pick Wolf Mother over the two.
Yeah, I got to say, I'm going to be honest, because like I'm not in the age demographic that is trying to, Greta Van Fleet is not trying to appeal to Greg Prato. Let's just say that, they're
Yeah.
appealing to a whole different crowd. So, I've heard little drips and drabs of their music, and I'm like, it's kind of like a Led Zeppelin derivative thing. And there are some songs that sound like it, but I got to tell you, I am not offended, and it does not rub me the wrong way as much as when I hear "Still of the Night" or "Get It On" or the Bonham Band from the '80s. As their albums go on, I'm talking about specifically Greta Van Fleet now. As their albums have gone on, I think they're doing a little different. Like there's one song, I forget the name, but I talk about it in the book. It actually sounds more like an '80s power ballad that they did. And
Is it a
yeah, I mean,
single that they released? Is it
I'm pretty sure it's a single. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's a single. I talk about it in the book.
okay?
It's a song that I mentioned. You want to try to find it quick?
Could try to find it. I was going to also look up Wolf Mother because, as far as I know, I think Wolf Mother might be still a band, but
Yeah, it's
Andrew
kind of hard to
Stockdale
see.
is like the only remaining member. But yeah, let's find that song, Greta Van Fleet. So you say it sounds a little bit.
It sounds almost like an '80s. Okay, wait. It's called "You're the One."
You're the One. Okay. I don't know if I've
Yeah,
heard
I
that.
say I say that could have been a hit power ballad back in the '80s.
You're the One.
I said especially if you replace the organ with the Casio, swapped producers Marlon Young, Al Sutton, and Herschel Boone with either Tom Werman, Bo Hill, or Spencer Proffer. And I said,
Okay.
and also issued an accompanying music video shot partly in black and white and partly in color that focused on the rigors of life on the road and missing your honey.
Okay. Yeah. Number 12 rock radio single in 2018.
Yes.
And that's off of Anthem of the Peaceful Army. Okay. We'll put that in this episode's playlist. Okay. And Robert Plant commented on Greta Van Fleet. That's in your book. What did he have to say?
He seemed to not be as turned off by them or he wasn't as filled with venom as he was towards David Coverdale in the 80s. Because the thing I was going to ask you too, now, it seems like, am I crazy, or is Led Zeppelin not as, I don't want to say not as popular, but not as like widespread as they were in the 80s now? I mean, like, for instance, like teenagers, I don't think as many teenagers now are under the Led Zeppelin spell as they were like when I was a teenager in the late 80s.
I agree. I would say that's the case. I asked my nephew, he's 20, and he's big into rap. That's pretty much all he listens to. And I said, do any of you or any of your friends listen to any rock and roll? He's like, nah, a little bit. And he said, Pink Floyd.
Right.
Didn't say Zeppelin.
I would say if anything, Queen may have replaced Led Zeppelin as the band that probably is more played and more like widespread throughout the generations at this point.
Yeah, because my sister, her daughter, I think I remember when she was maybe 10 or 11 when this came up, and her dad knew that I was a big music guy. And he says, Isabella, tell Uncle Eric what your favorite band is. I said, Queen. I was like, oh, that's cool. All right. We got some rock and roll. He's still alive. Cause that's what I wonder, like how many younger people listen to rock and roll, but that's that's one upside to Greta Van Fleet. Like you say, they're appealing towards a younger audience, and that's great. So if whatever it takes to get a resurgence of rock and roll, they'll take it. They'll take it. Booked on Rock Podcast. We'll be back after this.
I've seen the future. You know what it is? It's a 47-year-old virgin sitting around in his beige pajamas, drinking a banana broccoli shake, singing I'm an Oscar Mayer wiener.
The holidays are all about sharing with family. Meals, couches, stories, Grandma's secret pecan pie recipe. And now you can also share a cart with Instacart's family carts. Everyone can add what they want to one group cart from wherever they are. So you don't have to go from room to room to find out who wants cranberry sauce, or who should get mini marshmallows for the yams, or collecting votes for sugar cookies versus shortbread. Just share a cart and then share the meals and the moments. Download the Instacart app and get delivery in as fast as 30 minutes. Plus, enjoy free delivery on your first 3 orders. Service fees and terms apply.
Why get all your holiday decorations delivered through Instacart? Because maybe you only bought 2 wreaths, but you have 12 windows. Or maybe your toddler got very eager with the advent calendar. Or maybe the inflatable snowman didn't make it through the snowstorm. Or maybe the twinkle lights aren't twinkling. Whatever the reason, this season, Instacart's here for hosts and their whole holiday haul. Get decorations from the Home Depot, CVS, and more through Instacart, and enjoy free delivery on your first 3 orders. Service fees and terms apply.
Led Clones, the Led Zeppelin Imitator Craze of the 80s and beyond. It is out now, and you can find it wherever books are sold, and people can find you online. Greg, where?
At twitter.com/Greg Prato Writer or x.com/Greg Prato Writer. That's the popular thing to say nowadays. And also, you can go on Amazon.com, do a search for Greg Prato or Led Clones, because this book is available as paperback, hardcover, Kindle, or audio version narrated by me.
You do another audio. Okay.
I do.
You're getting into those, huh? You enjoy that.
Well, you know what it is? It's pretty much all about making money, isn't it?
It's it, man. You got kids, you got family to feed.
Yes.
You know,
mortgage, bills. Yeah.
All right, Greg. Thanks, man. We'll have you back on again whenever you would like to come back on. You have an open invite here.
And also, one last thing I just want to say, there's a part in the book that I talk about if Led Zeppelin cloned others. That's one of the last chapters. Yes. So.
You're right. That's, well, you know, that's the thing, is that they were accused of stealing a lot of the old blues songs.
Yes.
And there were lawsuits that were filed, and indeed. I don't know. What do you think about that?
You know what it was? I'll be honest, until I did research for this book, I was like, yeah, they probably may have just borrowed a thing here or there. But with the advent of YouTube and things like that, and they have these special things on YouTube that they will play a bit of a Led Zeppelin song and play another song. And yeah, I hate to say it, they definitely did rip off a lot of bands. But to Led Zeppelin's credit, they did write a lot of their own original material that was just as good. But you have to admit that, yes, they did, in fact, shamelessly rip off a lot of people, and early on did not credit them. So that is quite a shady maneuver. Even though I'm a huge Zeppelin fan,
Same here.
I have to say that is a bit of a slimy thing to do, just to rip off, artists and not credit them and not pay them initially.
Yeah. But of all these bands who tried and still try to sound like Led Zeppelin, there's only one Zepp, man. That's one of the most amazing bands. Those four guys, what they could do. I was going to
say you needed those four guys in the same room, similar to like you needed the original four Queen members in the same room. My personal opinion, you needed the four Van Halen guys. You needed two Van Halens, Michael Anthony and David Lee Roth in the same room.
There's just a magic there that.
Yeah, you needed Gene, Paul, Ace, and Peter in the same room. There's certain bands that, for me, you needed certain members for it to really be to be magical.
Look at what Robert Plant. Well, really, all the guys, Robert, Jimmy, and John Paul Jones were basically. But Robert was the guy who always would make it clear: no Bonzo, no Zeppelin. We are not moving forward.
Yeah, that's something else. No matter what you could say about Robert Plant, you got to give him the highest. Yeah. I mean, that is
integrity.
Really respectable to do that, because they could have made zillions of dollars over the years just shamelessly going out as Led Zeppelin. Yep. But just to put his foot down and say, no, I'm not going out as Led Zeppelin, that is really commendable.
Integrity and follows his own heart artistically with what he does with his solo career, which I'm a big fan of what he does on his own. Yep. And I wish Jimmy Page did more. I always enjoyed listening to whatever he would do, because just hearing him play guitar, man, he's got an awesome style and the tone. And I just wish he did more, but he has done a great job in carrying the legacy of Led Zeppelin forward with all these reissues and box sets and live releases and you name it. I just wish that Van Halen did more of that. I wish, but maybe Alex is saying he's going through the vault and seeing what's in there. So
yeah, I mean, I'm hoping one day we'll start getting box sets of fair warning sessions and stuff like that. It'd be great to hear.
And films of the concerts that they even soundboard, release a show from every tour or whatever. Whatever.
I agree. And there's also, of course, rumors that Chris Cornell recorded with them and all these other guys. And Billy Sheehan was doing instrumental stuff that they never found a singer for in the late 90s, things like that. I'd like to hear.
Crazy. Yeah, man. All right, Greg, thanks, man. We'll talk to you again soon.
Bye-bye.
That's it. It's in the books.